That afternoon, the Agora market was bustling with laughter, the clattering of horse hooves on the marble pavement, and the aroma from food stalls. People from all over the city came here to trade and buy goods, the cheerful greetings of housewives, when the spotted old friends mixed with the shouts of olive, bread, and wine vendors. In the distance, at the corner of the street, a small tavern remained open. The owner, a middle-aged man with a grey beard, was wiping old ceramic cups. On the shelf, earthen wine jugs were neatly arranged. Laughter rang out from a few men who had been there since morning, discussing the harvest, herding goats on Mount Parnassus, and even philosophical debates about the gods. Towards evening, a group of blacksmiths entered the tavern. They had just finished their work at the forge, faces flushed from the heat. Sitting at a long wooden table, they ordered a few jugs of wine to quench their thirst. At first, their conversations were light-hearted and casual, but then one of them, called Thallus, started drinking more than the others. His voice grew louder, shifting from work stories to recounting philosophical debates at the Lyceum, then to singing a song about Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. His friends laughed while advising him to drink less, but he waved them off and continued drinking. The tavern owner approached gently. "Hey friend, take it easy. You've got forging to do tomorrow." Thallus just laughed loudly and leaned back in his chair, his eyes dazed. The owner sighed, looking at the others as if seeking help. As night fell, the tavern's oil lamps flickered in the gentle breeze from the window. Thallus remained at the table, leaning against it, reminiscing about his childhood on the mountainside as a young goatherd. Another friend, named Pythios, began sharing his latest drunken adventure. How he got lost on the way home and had to sleep at the forge. The tavern owner brought over a tray of fragrant toasted bread, hoping a little food might sober Thallus up. But Thallus only took a small piece, chewing slowly, then continued humming his song. One by one, the others left, except for a few close friends who patiently stayed behind. The atmosphere in the tavern quieted down, with only the sound of crickets chirping outside. The owner shared stories of his youth, when he too used to drink until he couldn't stand up. He chuckled softly, his eyes reflecting a bit of sympathy, and poured more water for the last guest. Outside, the moonlight began to shine on the red-tiled roofs. Another blacksmith, named Lycos, started talking about his father, a skilled bronze caster who would always drink after a long day. He would sit by the fire, sipping small sips of wine, and tell old stories about Hephaestus, the god of fire and metalworking. Lycos remembered his father always saying, "Wine helps us forget the fatigue of iron and steel, but don't drink too much, son." Thallus, now silent, nodded at his friend's story. Perhaps in his drunken state, he recalled similar advice from his late father. His gaze softened as he gently placed his cup on the table, murmuring, "It's just, I miss home." Pythios patted his shoulder, and the group fell into a gentle silence, with only the night breeze blowing through the window. The tavern slowly returned to its peaceful state. The owner sat in a corner, took out an old lyre, and played soft melodies. The sound was gentle, like a lullaby for the weary souls, gradually falling asleep. The night dragged on, but no one hurried to leave. After the blacksmith was carried outside to rest under the olive tree, the small tavern returned to its tranquility. Yet the air inside was still heavy with the scent of wine, and conversations once again drifted back to a topic that most preferred to avoid: the drunkards and the harm they caused. The tavern owner, a middle-aged man with silver hair, sat down in his wooden chair, looking out the window and quietly thinking about the times he had to intervene when customers drank too much. He was no stranger to such chaotic scenes. In a society where wine was an essential drink for parties, festivals, and gatherings, overindulgence was a common occurrence. However, the consequences were never small. One afternoon, a group of young men from noble families came to his tavern, their faces bright and cheerful. They had decided to throw a small party to celebrate their victory in a sports competition. As wine was poured into ceramic cups, laughter filled the air. But soon after, one of them began to act out of character. The young man stood up, laughing loudly, and started singing old songs, his tunes off-key, stumbling as he danced, causing chaos at the table. The tavern owner shook his head as he watched the scene. He remembered the times he had to step in to stop such excessive antics, but he couldn't deny that wine, though it could bring joy and connection, was also the thing that caused life to become disordered. When drinkers lost control of their behavior, the harmony and peace of their gatherings gradually vanished. One day, a regular customer, an elderly scholar from Athens, came into the tavern and sat near the window. He had witnessed many such incidents throughout his life, and had spent much time studying the effects of wine on the human spirit. He told the tavern owner that according to the teachings of philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, overindulgence in wine not only affected the body, but also clouded the mind and intellect of a person. He advised everyone to drink in moderation as part of the ritual to honor the god Dionysus, but not to let wine dominate their lives. However, despite such advice being frequently mentioned, reality was not easy to change. Parties continued, and occasionally odd behaviors still occurred. But in the glow of the sunset, when everything calmed down, the tavern owner felt a glimmer of hope. After all, with each passing day, he still saw the people in the tavern returning, exchanging gentle well wishes, and enjoying cozy evenings with light wine, where alcohol no longer caused disruption. The tavern owner cleaned the cups, rearranged the wooden tables, and gazed outside. The soft sound of the waves on the Athens shore brought a sense of tranquility. He knew that although society would still face issues like the problem of drunkenness, the peace in everyday life could come from simple things like this. Months after the party at the small tavern ended, Thalys no longer appeared at the drinking gatherings like before. While his close friends still sought him out to share old stories, Thalys now frequently attended philosophical lectures in Athens. The lessons from the philosophers and his reflections on the nature of humanity and the world around him had helped him regain his rationality. Although there were still nights when he felt a gnawing hunger in his stomach and a desire to seek solace in wine, Thalys remembered his father's words. Wine can be a friend, but if you don't know where to stop, it will become an enemy. Thalys tried to give up the habit of excessive drinking, replacing it with mornings of waking up early, walking in the olive garden, and reflecting on life's lessons. Thales began to help others who were facing similar struggles. One time, during a conversation with a young man who had just arrived in Athens, he shared his difficulties in overcoming the temptation of alcohol. Thales emphasized that, although society viewed drinking wine as an essential part of socializing, each person must know their own limits. He also shared stories of those who had lost their families and careers because of alcohol abuse. Pythios, one of Thales' close friends, also gradually realized the need for change. After a long evening of drinking at the tavern, he noticed his health was deteriorating, his mind foggy, and his body exhausted. It was a day when he couldn't wake up on time for work and missed an important meeting. This moment made Pythios question the purpose of his life. He decided to change. Pythios gave up alcohol and began to focus on his work, learning more about the arts and philosophy. He took classes on pottery and stone polishing, skills necessary for his profession. In his spare time, Pythios began to walk along the coast, seeking peace in nature. Gradually, Pythios' life became richer and more fulfilling. He no longer found joy in fleeting pleasures, but in creativity and quiet mornings in the vineyard. Each step he took was not just the step of someone breaking a bad habit, but the step of someone moving toward freedom and the thirst for knowledge. Although people like Thales and Pythios had found a new path, there were still those who could not give up the drinking habit. The blacksmith group, of which Thales had once been a part, continued to gather on evenings, sipping wine and recounting old stories of war. The dominance of wine still lingered over these conversations. One blacksmith, named Eryx, who had been Thales' close friend, could not escape the spiral of alcohol. Eryx not only drank heavily, but also became irritable and impatient in his work. When Thales accidentally met him again, he advised Eryx to find a way to control himself. But the response was only a sneer, full of challenge. Such moments made Thales and Pythios realize that change was not always easy, and not everyone could recognize its importance. However, people like them persevered, hoping that one day their old friends would see the need for change and rediscover themselves. Time passed, and the small tavern still existed in the heart of Athens, although fewer people came to drink like before. The old stories about the god Dionysus and the joyful parties were no longer the main topics. The tavern had become a place where those seeking peace. Wine still remained, but it was no longer the center of life. The tavern owner, who had witnessed too many lives being swept away by the whirlpool of drunkenness, now felt at peace. Despite life's challenges and difficulties, he still believed that change, no matter how small, could have a profound impact. This tavern was no longer just a place that served wine, but a place where people met, shared, and sought values beyond fleeting pleasures. Thus, the story of alcoholism in ancient Greek society gradually faded, making way for new stories, lessons on self-control, and the search for true values in life. As time passed, life in Athens became quieter for Thales and Pythios. They no longer participated in all-night drinking gatherings. Instead, their mornings passed in peaceful serenity, like the spring mornings in the outskirts of Athens, where the air was fresh and the sound of birds singing echoed from the lush green fields. Thales, now a true philosopher, not only participated in philosophical discussions, but also began teaching the younger generation of Athens. He shared stories about the gods and the moral values he had learned from his father. But he didn't stop there. He said that life was not just about seeking material wealth or satisfying instinctive desires. It was a journey of self-understanding and understanding the world around us. One day, Thales walked through the olive garden, a place where he had once reflected on philosophical stories. He met Eryx, his old friend, who still could not break free from the grip of alcohol. Eryx was still sitting there, his eyes unfocused, holding a wine cup, even though it was already morning. Thales looked at Eryx with a sad but non-judgmental gaze. He sat beside his friend and started the conversation. Remember the days when we went through those drunken nights together, but now life is more than just fleeting pleasures. I understand, Eryx, that it may not be easy for you to give up, but we must learn how to live with ourselves, not just for the moments of pleasure. Eryx remained silent, staring at the cup, then spoke. I've tried to quit drinking, but it's like a ghost always haunting me. It's the only friend I've had during my lonely days. Thales nodded gently, then continued. But it's in those loneliest moments that you need to find yourself again. Loneliness is not the enemy, but an opportunity for us to better understand what really matters. The conversation between Thales and Eryx continued in silence, with only the sound of the breeze passing through the olive trees and the birds singing like a soft melody. Eryx did not respond immediately, but his gaze became more thoughtful. Part of him realized that perhaps he had forgotten the value of sobriety, of living a life with a clearer purpose rather than just living through drunken episodes. One day, while Thales was participating in a philosophical discussion at the Athenaeum, a famous playwright named Aristophanes walked in. Aristophanes was well known not only for his comedic plays, but also for his satirical critique of the vices in Athenian society. Aristophanes began conversing with Thales, talking about the plays he was writing, which would target the growing social issues he saw in the city, particularly the problem of excessive drinking. Alcohol is not just a problem for the common people, but for the nobility as well, Aristophanes shared. The leaders of Athens may praise wisdom and justice, yet they indulge in lavish feasts. They fail to realize that they are tarnishing the very values they claim to uphold. Thales listened carefully and then responded, Aristophanes, I agree with you. But I also believe that it's not only the leaders who are affected by alcohol. The common people can also get swept up, and change must begin with each individual. We cannot just criticize without finding ways to address the issue. Aristophanes smiled, nodding in agreement, and said, So, what do you think we can do to bring about change? Thales thought for a moment and replied, We must start with education. If each of us understands that life is not just about fleeting pleasures, that every action has consequences, perhaps we would avoid repeating these mistakes. From then on, Thales not only participated in philosophical discussions, but also began organizing talks in public spaces where people could come and listen and engage in meaningful conversations. He shared lessons about self-control, the importance of living a purposeful life and not allowing bad habits to distort one's life. Pythios also continued to spread Thales' message, sharing with others the changes in his own life about giving up alcohol and finding new joys in life. Gradually, those around him began to change their habits, drinking less and turning to more meaningful activities. Change was never easy, and those still caught in the cycle of drinking remained. But in the light of philosophical discussions and the reminders from people like Thales and Pythios, change, no matter how small, it gradually spread throughout the community. As the discussions on moderation and self-control continued to grow, the message that Thales and Pythios had begun spread further than they could have imagined. The changes were gradual, but they were undeniable. People began to meet not just to drink, but to discuss the importance of purpose, self-discipline, and the simple joys of life. These small conversations, like ripples in a pond, slowly expanded into a larger movement. Thales and Pythios, though different in their approach, found themselves walking down the same path. Thales, with his philosophical teachings, encouraged people to reflect deeply on their actions, while Pythios, through his personal transformation, became a living example of the power of change. Together, they had started something that was taking root in the hearts and minds of the people of Athens. One day, as Thales walked through the agora, he encountered an old acquaintance, a former tavern keeper who had been known for his wild parties and excess. The man, now looking much older but calmer, approached Thales with a sincere look in his eyes. "I have you to thank, Thales," he said. "Your words, your teachings, they have helped me find my way. The tavern is quieter now. We talk, we learn. We no longer let wine dictate our lives." Thales smiled, seeing the transformation. It's not about giving up pleasures entirely, but about understanding that we control them, not the other way around. More and more, Thales and Pythios saw people shifting their habits. The taverns, once the epicenter of excessive revelry, became places where individuals came to share stories, discuss philosophy, and connect with one another in a meaningful way. It wasn't a complete eradication of drinking, but a shift in focus, where it became just one small part of a fuller life. As the sun began to set on another day in Athens, Thales and Pythios met in the familiar olive grove. The air was calm, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink. They sat silently for a while, watching the world around them, content with the changes they had helped foster. "It's happening," Pythios said, his voice full of quiet satisfaction. "The change is slow, but it's taking root. More people are looking for meaning beyond fleeting pleasures. They're looking for balance." Thales nodded thoughtfully. "The work is never done, but I believe the seeds have been sown. Each individual change, no matter how small, contributes to a greater shift. This city will continue to grow, not just in knowledge, but in wisdom. We've done what we can. Now it's up to them." As the years passed, the ripple of change that Thales and Pythios had started continued to shape the heart of Athens. New generations, inspired by the teachings of their elders, no longer saw drunken revelry as the pinnacle of enjoyment. Instead, they sought wisdom, community, and purpose. The taverns, once filled with excess, became gathering places for thoughtful discussion and learning. One evening, as the sun set over the olive trees, Thalis and Pythios stood together, watching the horizon. They knew their work wasn't finished, but they also knew that what they had started was far more powerful than they had ever imagined. "You did more than just change a few minds," Pythios said quietly. "You helped change the soul of this city." Thalis smiled, his eyes reflecting the calm of the evening. "We only planted the seeds. It's the people of Athens who made them grow." The city of Athens had transformed. What began as a few quiet conversations and simple lessons had become the foundation of a new way of life. It wasn't the grand gestures that changed Athens, but the small, steady decisions of individuals who chose wisdom over excess, purpose over pleasure. And as the final notes of this story echo through time, let us remember that change, no matter how small, can reshape the world. The ripple of wisdom continues to flow long after the conversation ends, leaving a legacy of balance, reflection, and self-mastery. Athens had transformed not in grand, sweeping changes, but in the quiet yet determined actions of individuals choosing reflection over indulgence. The small conversations, the shared lessons, and the pursuit of balance had slowly rewritten the city's story. As the final chapter of this tale closes, we are reminded that the smallest ripple of change can stir the deepest waters of a community. It's not always the loudest voices that shape the future, but those who quietly sow wisdom into the fabric of everyday life. The true legacy of this story is not just the change of Athens, but the enduring truth that transformation starts from within, one mindful choice at a time.